Let's talk about a real economic head-scratcher that happened back in 2025. It was a time when, on paper, India's economy was firing on all cylinders, absolutely booming. But at the same time, its currency, the rupee, was, well, it was sinking. So what was going on? This is the rupee's paradox.
This is the big question, right? How can you have one of the strongest economic performances in decades, and yet your currency is getting weaker? It just doesn't seem to add up. So, let's start digging in and putting the pieces of this puzzle together.
And to really understand the scale of this, we need to start with one single powerful number. By the end of 2025, the exchange rate hit about 90 rupees for a single US dollar. Now, that wasn't just another tick on the chart, it was a historic low, and it's the key to understanding this entire story.
Okay, so let's first break down this central conflict, what many called the paradox of 2025.
This didn't just happen overnight. If you look back, the rupee has been on this long journey slowly depreciating against the dollar for decades. I mean, look at this, from being at par, 1-to-1, back in 1947, to 45 in 2010, but then you see this sharp acceleration leading up to 2025. That final jump to nearly 90, that's what really got everyone's attention.
And here is that paradox, laid out side by side. On the one hand, you've got the Indian economy having its best performance in ages, so good that S&P actually upgraded its credit rating. Growth was speeding up all through 2025. But on the other hand, the rupee dropped more than 6% against the dollar. And here's the real kicker. Even with that drop, it was still one of the better performing emerging market currencies. That just tells you how insane the pressure was on a global scale.
So if the problem wasn't coming from inside India, where was it coming from? Well, the answer wasn't at home. You have to look outward, because India was basically sailing headfirst into a perfect storm of global issues.
This really captures it perfectly. India's domestic success ran smack into a brutal new global reality. We'd entered a world where having a strong, healthy economy just didn't guarantee you a stable currency anymore. India was caught in these huge geopolitical crosscurrents that were completely out of its control.
So what was this storm actually made of? Well, first, the U.S. hit the global economy with major tariffs, disrupting trade everywhere. That uncertainty spooked foreign investors, who started pulling their money out of countries like India in a massive selling frenzy. Then you had the constant threat that China might devalue its currency, which would have thrown the whole region into chaos. Put it all together, and you get this new normal of just permanent uncertainty.
So with all this chaos coming from the outside, all eyes in India turned to its main line of defense, the Reserve Bank of India. And that brings us to a next section. In RBI, we trust.
Think of it like this. In these incredibly choppy global waters, the RBI had to step up and be the steady captain at the helm. It was their job to navigate the chaos and try to shield the Indian economy from the worst of the storm.
And this one quote from an HSBC report really says it all. In a world full of risk and unpredictability, there was a huge amount of faith being placed in the central bank to steer the ship to safety.
So what did the RBI actually do? Well, they rolled out a pretty impressive defensive playbook. First, they manned the gates, taking swift, decisive action. Second, they jumped right into the currency markets, buying up rupees to stop it from going into a total freefall. Third, with all that foreign money leaving, they had to pump liquidity back into the system to keep things running smoothly. And finally, they acted ahead of time to make sure a risky credit boom didn't get out of hand and cause another crisis.
At the end of the day, the RBI's mission was to make sure India remained a beacon of stability. In a world that felt like it was spinning out of control, this was about more than just numbers. It was about projecting confidence.
But look, a weaker currency isn't just an abstract economic concept. It has very real effects on businesses and people. So let's take a look at who actually won and who lost in this whole situation.
It's such an important question, because a shift in the exchange rate is never neutral. It always creates a new set of advantages for some and huge new challenges for others. So who do you think came out on top and who got squeezed?
When you lay it out like this, it becomes crystal clear. The winners? The exporters. Think about it. IT companies, pharmaceutical giants. They were earning revenue in powerful US dollars, but paying for their staff and operations in weaker rupees. That's a huge boost to their profits. And the losers were, of course, the importers. Airlines have to buy jet fuel in dollars. Paint companies need imported raw materials. And of course, India has to import a lot of crude oil. For them, a weaker rupee meant their costs just shot through the roof. Okay, so that was the chaotic year of 2025. But what came next? In our final section, we're going to look at 3 possible futures for 2026, based on analysis from the Economic Survey.
The first, and maybe the most likely path forward, is called managed disorder. In this world, the global chaos doesn't just vanish, we just get used to it. The world is still connected by trade, but there's this constant layer of friction and distrust simmering just below the surface.
The second scenario is a lot more serious. It's a disorderly, multipolar breakdown. This is where things really start to fracture. Global rivalries intensify, and countries start using trade as a weapon. Sanctions become common, and supply chains get redrawn based on who your political friends are, not what makes economic sense.
And then there's the third scenario, the low probability but high impact nightmare, a systemic shock cascade. This is the doomsday scenario where a financial crisis, a tech crisis, and a geopolitical crisis all hit at once, and they feed off each other, creating a downward spiral that could be even worse than the 2008 crash.
So what's the final takeaway? Well, the analysis suggests that across all these potential futures, India is actually in a better position to weather the storm than many other nations, mostly because of its huge domestic market. But, and this is a really important but, that does not make it bulletproof. In a global hurricane, nobody stays completely dry.
Which leaves us with this one final massive question. In this chaotic new world, is it possible for India to somehow take all these global challenges, these headwinds, and find a way to turn them into an advantage, to turn them into tailwinds that propel it forward? That is the great challenge for the years ahead.